The Browns have a peculiar history when it comes to first-round picks. Now, is it as bad as some people think it is? Well, that's what I'm here to determine. So, without further ado, I'm going to present my tier list for the Browns' first-round draft picks from 2010 to now. All right, so how we're going to do this thing is just we're going to go through S, A, B, C, and D and rank everybody accordingly in chronological order, as best of chronological order as I can off the top of my head. S is going to be those players who were undoubtedly good for the franchise, one of the best players in their position in franchise, kind of recent franchise history. A tier is going to be for very good picks. B tier is going to be for solid picks, guys who didn't, blow the world or set the world on fire, but were serviceable nonetheless. C tier, kind of that average player. You don't hate that you picked them, but you don't love that you did it. D is going to be your standard bust, your guy who just didn't work out, but you didn't end up hurt after it. And then F tier is going to be those guys who are just so bad that they actually hurt the franchise and set them back. All right, so now that we got the criteria down, let's rank all the first-round picks since 2010. And we're going to start out with Alex Mack, who was drafted in 2009, was one of the best centers in football in his time in Cleveland, continued to be one of the best centers in football, even now with the Atlanta Falcons. I think he's a clear case for a S-tier kind of guy. Again, one of the best picks, one of the highlight picks of the Browns in the last 10 years. Can't really hate on that. And then you have Joe Hayden next. He was drafted in 2010. Oh, man. Now, there's going to be people who dislike Joe Hayden, but I think those people don't remember how dominant Joe Hayden was just in his prime years. I mean, this is a guy who held A.J. Green and Julio Jones, both in their respective primes, to statless games with, not that much help on the defensive roster. This is a dude who was an absolute beast, a true shutdown corner, never got the hype that he deserved because he wasn't on a better team. But Joe Hayden, no doubt, at one time in his career was one of the best defensive players in all of football, one of the best defensive players to ever put on a uniform in Cleveland, period. Also one of the best, if not the best defensive player since the expansion era with the Cleveland Browns. I think he's clearly in the S tier. I know people are upset that he went to Pittsburgh, but I'm really not. He did that for family reasons. I can understand if a player changes teams. The Browns ultimately cut him at the end of the day, too. So Joe Hayden, definitely an S tier. Respect him the most. I just got a lot of love for Joe Hayden. I ain't going to lie. All right, so the next guy who was drafted, I believe, was Phil Taylor. Phil Taylor is kind of the face of the Julio Jones draft. Or the Julio Jones trade. And I think that kind of gives everybody a bad taste in their mouth, as it should. But Phil Taylor wasn't a terrible player. If it weren't for his association to that trade, I would put him in C tier because I think he was serviceable. But since he is associated with that trade, you have to throw the guy in D tier because, you traded Julio Jones. He was part of the package. And ultimately, you got nothing out of that trade, honestly. So you got to throw Phil Taylor in the D tier, unfortunately. Now, speaking of a guy who there's going to be no debate on where they land, let's just put this out the way. I hate Brandon Weeden as a player. He might be a good person. Don't have anything against him as a human being, but as a player, one of the worst players I've had the pleasure of watching in my life. So yeah, Brandon Weeden, clearly F tier, hurt the franchise. One of the players that set us on the path to get Johnny Manziel, which ultimately led us to 0-16 and inadvertently. I don't like Brandon Weeden. Now somebody who is kind of a bigger bust in the way of he was picked earlier, but I don't see him that way because Trent Richardson, he was actually good in Cleveland the full year that the Browns had him. They traded him before he became a meme. And the Trent Richardson that became a meme wasn't in Cleveland. That was in Oakland, in Indianapolis. But, Trent Richardson, again, he's definitely a bust. I don't think he hurt the franchise because they got their first round pick back, which did lead to Johnny Manziel, but that's not Trent Richardson's fault. That's bad management, and I'm not going to blame him for bad management. So Trent Richardson, D tier, Brandon Weeden, F tier all the way. By the way, they drafted Brandon Weeden over guys like Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins. So fun story there. All right, so now we're going to go to the next year's draft, which was just an unfortunate draft. 2013 was one of the worst drafts in NFL history, in my opinion. Just uneventful. You had Ezekiel Ansah go like top 5 in that because he had a good senior day before nobody knew about him. It was a bare draft. So I don't think Barkevious Mingo would have been like a top 10 pick in any other draft other than this one. And I don't think he would have necessarily even been like a lock to be a first round pick. He reminds me a lot of Chizen from LSU, who's coming out this year, but I think Chizen's a better player than him. Barkevious Mingo, again, got hyped up because they had to hype up somebody, but ultimately was never supposed to be where he was drafted, and it's not really his fault there, but he is a bust. Good special teams player, but he was drafted in the top 10. You're not looking for good special teams players in the top 10, so I'm going to have to put him in that D-bust category. Now we're going to jump to the next year's draft, and I'm going to put Danny Shelton, who was drafted that year, in C tier. He was a solid player, was able to do his job. He wasn't tremendous. He wasn't a game breaker. He wasn't going to change the game. He's a good role player. And you drafted him in the middle of the first round. You didn't really waste a top tier pick on him. It wasn't in like a loaded draft. So, you did good enough with Danny Shelton where people aren't going to be angry about it, but I'm not going to argue that he was like a great pick. And you got Cam Ervin, who was awful in Cleveland, not that awful in Kansas City. Put him in that D tier. He's a bust. He's just a regular old busty kind of bust. Now, that was 2015 that I just ranked. I skipped the year because this year is kind of a traumatic year. It's one of the worst drafts in NFL history that I've seen a team have. And it was no excuse for this draft to be bad because the NFL draft that year was loaded. There were I think within the first 15 picks, I think like 10 or 12 of the first 15 picks all became Pro Bowlers. And of course, the Browns had 2 picks in this year's draft. I think they had the 4th, and I think they ended up trading up and getting the 22nd. I think they started with the 28th. But they had 2 picks in this draft. They traded back their 4th pick, which was going to be Sammy Watkins, but that went to the Bills, and they got the 8th pick. They still could have got, I think, Mike Evans. They definitely could have got Odell Beckham. And I think this is the year that Jarvis Landry even went in the 2nd round. So a bevy of wide receiver options, but they ended up taking Justin Gilbert, who ended up being one of the worst players in the entire draft that year. Just a terrible pick. Just dumb. He wasn't committed to being a great player. I'll just say that. You could look up the reports yourself, but this wasn't somebody who was committed to being a good player. They did no research on him to know that was the case. So this dude was just bad. He had no excuse to be that bad. He was opposite of Joe Hayden his first year. He was bad. He couldn't even see the field. He was getting torched in practice all the time. Just never lived up to the potential. Never wanted to do the extra work. I try not to blame the players for their situations that they're in, but Justin Gilbert wasn't in a bad situation. He was just an awful player, and his career is already over now because of it. And then the other guy they drafted, whose career has long been gone, Johnny Manziel. I don't know how you can make an argument that he's not F tier. Sure, he wasn't terrible his second year, but he was bad enough in that first year and set the franchise back. Pretty much his presence cost the Browns the playoffs that season. The Browns, the year he was drafted, went 7-3, I believe, to start the season, or 7-4. I think they won in Atlanta. And then the pressure to start Manziel in the fan base and in the ownership became so much that Brian Hoyer got benched. That completely ruined the chemistry of that team. Sure, they weren't really going up before then, and Brian Hoyer had a terrible game in Indianapolis right before all of this happened. But, it just set everything downhill. Also didn't do anything good for Josh Gordon and his future. And, kind of tanked that entire season. Probably cost the Browns the one shot that they had the playoffs recently. So, yeah, you got to put Johnny Manziel there. He was also the guy who took the Browns from being like a 4-12, 6-10 bad franchise and just threw them to 2-14, 1-15, eventually 0-16. Again, one of the worst picks in the NFL. I would have to make a whole new tier if he was drafted in the top 10, but he wasn't. He was a late round pick, so he wasn't like a big waste of resources. But again, this is a draft that had great players littered all around it. And the Browns ended up getting the worst two players in the entire draft with two first-round picks. I don't understand how they did it, but they found a way. And sometimes it's just like that. Now we're going to go to the next year, which was Corey Coleman. This is the year I think they had the second pick to start, and they traded that pick to Philadelphia, which ended up being Carson Wentz. And, this is just the year that they drafted Deshaun Kaiser. Really just made some very arrogant moves too, and they were really arrogant about how they went about it in the media, talking about Carson Wentz isn't a franchise guy. Hopefully they learn from their mistakes and they don't make these mistakes again this year, because I think that was Paul DePodesta who made the quote. And, Andrew Berry was a part of this front office, but this was the Corey Coleman year. And Corey Coleman was just another bust. Started off decent enough. He had some potential in his rookie year. And then as just time went on, he just kind of fell apart. I think it's even documented on Hard Knocks. The dude just completely fell apart. Once they added Jarvis Landry, once they added some options there, he just fell apart and got himself traded to Siberia. And then they cut him not to lose a 7th-round pick. So they ultimately felt like he wasn't worth losing their 7th-round pick. He was not a good choice. He's still trying to hang on there with the Giants, but again, not a good choice. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. Now, somebody who it's hard to argue wasn't a good choice, Myles Garrett. Obvious S tier, one of the best defensive players. Sure, he doesn't have the long resume that Alex Mack or Joe Hayden has, but I think he's going to be ultimately better at his position than those two ever were. And that's saying a lot, because these are two guys who were elite at their position at one time. I think Myles Garrett's going to clearly belong in that category. He already does belong in that category. And I think he's probably the best thing or decision that the Browns have made within the last 10 years. So shout out to Myles Garrett. Hope great things for his future. And then in that draft, I think they had 3 first-round picks. Going to put David Njoku as the second of those first-round picks in the B tier. I'm going to drop him to C. Had an all right rookie year. Had what looked like on the verge of a breakout second year. Should have broke out his third year, but all kind of weirdness happened. He ultimately isn't consistent. He does get injured often, and he just doesn't catch the ball consistently. And if that's going to be an issue, I don't know if he's going to play a lot this year. I don't think his future's certain. Again, not a waste of a pick. This is a starting tight end in the NFL, much like Danny Shelton's a starting defensive tackle in the NFL, or at least a rotational guy. But, it has not been like a good player so far, or a reliably good player. We're always talking about potential when it comes to David Njoku, but he's starting to get up there in years as far as his rookie deal goes. So, potential ain't going to do it anymore. I'm going to put him in the C tier. All right. And then somebody who I think actually earned their shot at B tier is Jabril Peppers. Solid player, good starter, was ultimately good enough to convince Dave Gettleman that he's a first-round pick. I like Jabril Peppers. I think Jabril Peppers is a B-tier guy. And then we're going to go to the next year's draft, which was the Baker Mayfield draft. And Baker Mayfield is going to be A-tier with the potential to be S-tier if he finally picks it up and has a good season next year and kind of shows what he showed his rookie year. Does turn the ball over a lot. Does have some questions about him when it comes to his ability to come through consistently in the clutch. Has thrown a lot of game-ending interceptions and just turned the ball over a ton too, even in his rookie year where he was playing good. But let's not get bogged down with the bad stuff. He is the most accurate and has stopped the bleeding at the quarterback position in Cleveland, clearly. He's a guy who's going to see the end of his rookie deal as a quarterback, which is rare in Cleveland. And I think he's going to get another contract. He's a franchise quarterback, in my opinion. And the Browns haven't had that. What stops him from being S tier is that I don't think he has dominated at his position the way Alex Mack or Joe Hayden or Myles Garrett has. I think he has to show that before he can be an S tier. But as of right now, he's a clear A tier. And then Denzel Ward, if he were more consistent last season and stayed healthy last season, he would be an S tier. But as of right now, he's with Baker in A tier. Again, very good player. Had one very good year, one all right year. We want to see how he comes out next year. And again, these things can change, especially with the recent guys on the tier list. But that's my thoughts going into the NFL draft of what the Browns tier list looks like in the 2010s. What do you think, and where do you think the Browns pick this year is going to line up? Do you think he's going to be a tackle who's going to be S tier or A tier, or do you think they're going to get a bust? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and let me know how you would rank these guys in the comment section down below. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.